This real-side experience would begin with an offer, it would seem. I would be sitting in a recreated version of my house, with the ground floor representing the personal self and the top floor representing the unseen dimensions of the personal self, the real side. One should pay attention to where they find themselves should a real side experience involve their recreated house. Specifically, I would be stationed in my bedroom, which is on the top floor. This would certainly signify that perhaps I was taking a momentary rest. This is a common occurrence with individuals on their journeys of ears recognition, that they take rest stops along the way, as the process is indeed arduous. But of course, one ought not linger too long, for even if the position one has established seems favourable, there is always more to be and more to see, an endless recognition into the isness, and it's all too easy to become comfortable, self-convinced, and dig into the position that we have established. It's easy to keep putting off the further scaling of the ears mountain and remain part way up it. Perhaps not such a concern if we had established ears recognition, that we can at least assume a position in the literal first tiers of the true reality. But if our comfy rest spots are still creationally based, if recognition of the ears hasn't been achieved, then regardless of how delightful the creational spot may be, in the ethereal as an example, we are still cause and effect bound to a simulator that is spiralling into demise due to our agreements to a restriction that make it so. And every level of the simulator will be swallowed up as the simulator compacts and contracts and absorbs into itself, and then winks out of existence. Then we would have to start over in another simulator. And indeed, as I lay there in my bedroom, having my rest, an individual would manifest. He seemed sincere enough, in that he harboured no ill intent or malice, as I read his real intent with my real awareness, and indeed wore the face of a friend I once knew on the physical level. It could well have been the genuine individual, or maybe one assuming his form. As this I couldn't determine, but he extended me an offer, as it were. The scene would fade, and I would accompany him, as he led me to what looked like a golden temple of a kind. Apparently it was a place in creation, very secluded and separated from practically everything else in the simulator. a place where only few could find and also access, as entry could only be gleaned with a sort of secret word. This individual knew the location and the word that granted entry, so I would say he was not the genuine friend I once knew, as that individual was very personal self-immersed, a typical one-dimensional character, and as such, unlikely to be intent-motivated in such a manner as this. The temple seemed indeed exquisite, and suggested a place where one might indeed be contented, but it seemed deserted. We were the only ones here, as though it were a forgotten, unknown, and lost feature of this simulated creation. The offer was sincere. There was no hint of deception or trickery, as though whoever this individual was, he had decided to provide this as an option, as a spot in creation that I might remain in if I so chose. I would, however, respectfully decline his offer, for as nice as it seemed to be, it was still in a creation, and rather devoid of anybody else or form of life, and he didn't seem upset or put out of sorts by my choice. The scene switched, and now I was in a gloomy, opened countryside setting, the scene sombre and oppressive, a real awareness view of creation as it really is, I would suggest, beyond the agreed to surface visuals, that of a simulator descending into darkness as it actually is. And in the darkness would be large roaming crocodiles, representing surely the reptilians, which have an iron control throughout creation, and again whose existence would be hidden to the unaware and the one-dimensional literalized, as the unconscious unaware would just accept the presented surface world, which would be absent of any reptilian presence, just as the reptilian controlling and destructive systems would seem beneficially agreeable on the surface also, the reptilian intent behind it all hidden to the programmed personal self. I was witnessing a group of individuals who were being assigned rifles, the purpose of which was to slay these large crocodiles, and was indeed invited to participate and take up my own rifle. With bullets representing ideas, it was more a case then that the option was available to attempt to impose our ideas upon the ideas that these reptilian crocodiles represented. A clash of ideas, I would suggest then, a literal exchange of idea fire that would go nowhere if agreement was lacking on either side. Far better would it be to establish a new position and not attempt to conflict with the ideas of others, or impose our ideas upon them, as this becomes abrasive. And if ideas are creationally based with no reference to the true reality, regardless of how they seem on the surface, they are effectively useless, as any idea is a cause and effect restriction that binds those in agreement to a creation. With ideas that do reference the true reality, again, it isn't a case of assailing others with such ideas just to present wherever it is possible, and then others decide if they will take a look at what is being offered or not, as we can't think for others or impose upon them, or we can become embroiled in their karma, even though what we are presenting is beneficial. The reptilian controllers, through their forced impositions, as an example, now have to deal with all the multitudes they have trawled agreement from. Intertwined are they with the karma of the agreeing masses, that they will be rather stuck with these unconscious masses for lifetimes. This crocodile shooting was clearly another representation here of a conflict of ideas, and the potential then of everyone involved being drawn into more cause and effect taplining restriction experience as a consequence. For as I watched, the individuals would be firing at the crocodiles and having no effect. Their ideas were not being accepted, and the crocodiles would proceed to attack and maul them in retaliation. The real solution, of course, being not to fight or protest the reptilian systems, because we have all had a hand in bringing these systems into effect experience anyway, through agreement, but more to assume a position aside from all the ideas in creation, that of the nowness of the isness of our real awareness. For to protest or attack systems of control which are ideas is to engage with those ideas, to incorporate them, and this is also a form of agreement, and we then are committed to experience the effect fallout. And so I vacated the scene, not participating in a pointless exchange of literal ideas, but however now had one of the crocodiles pursuing me. Evidently then, it would seem that I had drawn attention to myself, despite my not involving myself in a creational-based, personal self to personal self created idea conflict. I would start blasting at my reptilian pursuer with magical fire from my hands, and generally, as is normally the case, this should have been sufficient to put down my attacker. Through the connection with the real awareness, we have the ability to better handle any real side situation and attack, and our capability to handle ourselves becomes more so as we recognize further how to stand in the reality of the real awareness that we are. A real awareness aside from creation. A reality that can't be infringed upon by anything creationally based. As for attacks to occur, there must be agreement to ideas that facilitate the attack, and the isness and the real awareness operates in a reality beyond ideas and the agreements to them. So a complete standing in our real awareness means there is no possibility of being the recipient of any experience that is based on the necessity of agreement to idea causes that produce effects. Cause and effect only applies to creation, and not to the true reality life is, and our real awareness. Although operating in creation as we do need to create in order to produce our comparison effect experiences for is recognition, and earning our way does entail creating also through that which we creatively present. And of course this results in confrontation and attack from those who wish to retain control of the simulator and keep everyone in creation as their agreeable slaves. Attacks made possible by stepping out of the real awareness that is aside from cause and effect creation and into the arena of creation, where utilizing the personal self to create, has us opening these windows of attack potentiality. So the necessity to defend oneself becomes so, and as we become more aware, we become more adept at doing so. I would have expected then that this crocodile representing reptilian would have succumbed to my magics, but alas, no effect was the result, as though my abilities were as useless as the literal idea bullets being exchanged earlier. I would cease my attempts and resort to running instead, the crocodile never more than a few feet behind. I would enter now what looked like the ruins of an old building, the crocodile following me inside and snapping at my ankles. The situation would be resolved, however, in a rather interesting, unexpected way, for my personal self at any rate. For instead of further conflict, it's as though I turned, faced the huge crocodile, and merged with it. I became it, and there I was, in the form of this large crocodile, and a few moments later the crocodile faded away, and I was restored to my usual form and alone in these building ruins. What I suggest then was overall a series of 3 views. The first part representing the temptation to remain in a comfortable spot in creation and even at this late hour of the simulator demise, there are undoubtedly places to hunker down, to hide out, and retreat to. Many of these created spiritual paths and ideas as examples always use as their selling point the opportunity to assume higher dimensional positions. The fifth dimension was always a favourite idea, generally flaunted about. But, of course, regardless of if such positions are available and attainable or not, without the recognition of the ears, then we are very much creationally bound until we do recognize the true reality. And so, all the various offers of higher dimensional placements, or whatever the positions might be, will still be in creation, and regardless of how well you conceal yourself, the simulator is spiraling into its demise, and in reality then, nowhere in creation is safe from that. And besides, in creation, always you will be brushing up against the ideas of others. Always there will be conflict and drama that comes knocking at your door. The process of awareness involves facing all of creation and releasing all tapline agreements that bind us to it through cause and effect. So even if we do assume a delightful spot in some far-flung dimension, we can't run and hide from our agreements and the personal self-created consciousness. We rather take that with us wherever we go, and have to continuously be the effects of everything, as we have all contributed to the overall state of the simulator as we find it in this moment. We can't hide or distance ourselves from the effects of a creation we helped to construct. And so, perhaps a well-meaning individual took it upon himself to offer this option, to secure myself in some curious, hidden golden temple in some dimension or other. But as I just explained, this would only represent positioning in creation, and maybe this option was available as a result of my level of awareness that perhaps would not be so were I personal self-immersed and one-dimensional only, but nevertheless the real purpose remains, that of recognizing the ears and allowing that we are not caught in an imploding simulator, as this recognition is why we are in creation in the first place, not to just get comfortable, get jobs, and be happy. We, of course, decide whatever personal things that we do, but if they don't provide a benefit and don't support awareness and the whole of life and recognition of the ears in some way, what real value do they hold? The second view afforded was one of the pointlessness of allowing one's self to be absorbed into a creation through agreement to ideas. That conflict effectively is. The controllers will realize that as we protest, as we fight, as we engage with their ideas in this way, we are snared in cause and effect restriction through agreement to the ideas we are protesting, just as readily as if we had been passive and watching the world burn from our sofas. For of course, the greater part of the personal self, the subconscious, is programmed through lifetimes to cause and effect agreement to the reptilians and their ideas, which are destructive, restrictive, awareness suppressing, and the evidence is clear to see. The world is a reflection of what is being decided and agreed upon. Life is revealing our agreements through everyday experience, and despite the protests or the passiveness, everything is getting progressively worse, as the subconscious agreements are not being addressed, the personal self not faced, as only through real awareness does each individual step aside from being a subconscious and a conscious contributor to the simulator's collapse. As the real guides have said, regardless of his recognition at this moment, if an individual is sincere with their real intent to recognize the is, there is no karma for them. In other words, they have stepped aside from producing effects that must be experienced for themselves, and that which is effecting overall experience and simulator collapse, so they become no longer contributing factors to simulator demise. The third view was a seemingly indestructible reptilian, and despite real awareness afforded capability that generally puts down any threat as we encounter the confrontations that we do on the real side, this reptilian seemed then especially formidable. What we are dealing with on the real side, regardless of how it expresses itself, the attacks, etc., the body forms, are ideas, as everything in creation is the effect of decided ideas. A reptilian attacking us is overall an idea, a whole series of ideas, and decision ideas, and agreement ideas, that resulted in a moment where we are attacked by a reptilian. What we are destroying when we defend ourselves on the real side through our real awareness capabilities are basically then ideas. We are simply progressively more untouchable by creational ideas that are entering our experience and imposing upon us, representing quite clearly that we don't place agreement with them, not even so much that we do anything, but as we stand in the real awareness that is aside from creation, creational ideas can no more effect, as they can't have any bearing on the true reality, and this is represented visually for the personal self as us defeating and besting our monsters and attackers on the real side in whatever ways that we do. So we can readily walk through what are the ideas of others, but that which we can't defeat tends to be representing the idea that is our created consciousness. For naturally, regardless of how aware we become, as we remain in creation, we must drag the personal self along, and however we have constructed it, it will always be the culmination of all the experiences we have put it through since we first entered creation. The agreements and decisions throughout all our lifetimes, regardless of what they were, are what generated all the experiences that we now can use as a storehouse of comparison references to recognize the ears by. And even though we can now become conscious of the entirety of the created consciousness, and not restricted by the tap lines that stem from the agreements it comprises of, it is still there, and however we decided to overall construct it, and if we fall back into it, it is very easy to immerse ourselves in the routines and patterns of the programmed behavior we have decided as to its construction. So rather a case of we need the personal self to relate to and use the comparison references of experience for, but rather have to keep it at bay and not cater to it any more than is necessary. And like a fly, it troubles, agitates and bothers us, and wants what it wants. On the real side then, an unbeatable adversary could very well be us fighting with the personal self, a fight that can't be resolved, as the personal self is going nowhere. But on this occasion I had an indestructible crocodile. One would think that perhaps we would be dealing with a very formidable reptilian, and indeed there are plenty of those afoot in creation, the reptilian overseers of the life levels as examples. But again, despite how powerful they seem in creation, it is all based on personal self-agreement as to their ability to impose upon our experience, which they do very easily through lifetimes of subconscious agreements to their control. But stepping into the real awareness, we are beyond the reaches of even these seemingly mighty beings, and can walk through and dismiss the ideas they overall represent as easily as any others. I would suggest then that this final scene had me running from what this crocodile represented. The idea being, of course, to face the whole of life and all of creation, for we each have played a part in the construction of the overall consciousness through agreements and the decisions we have made, and in order to extricate ourselves from the effects, we must become fully conscious of it all, and that means confronting every aspect of it. This crocodile then clearly represented the reptilian aspect of creation, the all-encompassing infusion of reptilian influence over the affairs and situations in this simulator through their incessant desire to control everything and claim agreement to their controlling positions. An overall situation then that could quite easily be represented by a crocodile, and as we each have contributed to the overall simulator situation as it stands, as we each have been the controllers, the controlled, have garnered agreement, and have ventured it to overall reptilian control, so it is that we can't simply destroy a representation of the overall reptilian controlled simulator situation, just as we can't destroy the personal created self, we can't destroy the overall collective created consciousness, the reptilian involvement interwoven through the very fabric of it, that we have played a part in bringing into cause and effect overall experience. And so we have a reptilian infused collective created consciousness of control that can't be destroyed, as it is agreements that have made it so, and we would be in a sense trying to destroy ourselves also, for we feature through our agreements in the very fabric of the reptilian controlled collective consciousness as it currently stands. But we must face it, as is a part of the process for each of us. We must face all of creation, and so it was that I would stop running, for as much as we can't run and hide from the personal self, regardless of where we position ourselves in creation, we can't run from this facing of the collective consciousness which is creation. Turning and facing this representation of creation then, I would not fight it, as this was a fight with no resolve, as was clearly the case, as it resisted my fire. The facing of creation was then represented as I became momentarily this crocodile, this representation of a controlling reptilian infused collective created consciousness, facing the personal self or creation as a whole successfully, would then demand that we must not fall back into it, to embrace it in any way. Fully conscious of its entirety, we then stand in indifference to it, ensuring no agreements or attachments linger that would cause and affect us into the continued experiences of them, and have us continue to add to the demise of the simulator through the programming of the personal self that is subconsciously overall in agreement with reptilian controlling ideas. As such, I became the crocodile, as I faced creation, as was the representation, perhaps not even the entirety of creation, as the facing of everything is a process and must be taken in steps, but maybe a proportion of creation that was reptilian orientated. But then the crocodile form faded, and I was restored to my usual human form, suggesting that I had faced what I had here and not retained agreement to any of it, for if I had retained any agreement, I would have imagined my form as a crocodile be maintained in this experience, as representing the overall idea of this reptilian controlled simulator, or at least a part of it that I was confronting here. There the experience ended, and the ruined building where I faced the crocodile may well have represented the potential possibility of the ruin of ourselves, should we be absorbed back into a creation and forfeit the opportunity of ears recognition.
Terrific, Kevin. Yes, a lot of fun explanation there from your side. It's so cool to have all these viewpoints, and I really appreciate you being here because I learn too as I go along with your experiences, because there's so much to confront. And yes, it's very important that we do that. Just like that experience I shared the other day about sitting beside Obama and his fake wife, etc. And I've had many confrontations on the real side with them, always trying to block me with whatever I'm doing here. And just this time where he kind of laid back, and so it's showing that many of them are laying back because they see what we're doing. And so I didn't have to do anything. I just stared in his eyes, and he began to whimper and his face distort, etc. I did this one time too with the neighbor's dog down here. They've got a pit bull, and every time we'd pass, they've got their garage with wrought iron on it so you can see through it, etc., a bunch of bars, etc. So these are the guard dogs, and Mexican dogs, all they do is bark for the most part. They see anybody, even 100 feet away, they start barking. So one time, it was last year, I just stopped as I walked by because he was barking like crazy. And the owner there is really cool. His name is Pasquale. And he said, well, this dog hates everybody. So, well, again, this is just kind of their demeanor. This is kind of how they're prompted here many times. And many of them are nice dogs. I've petted many of them, different dogs, etc. Start wagging their tail. Well, this dog here, really angry, walking back and forth, barking and growling. So I just stopped. I just stared right in his eyes, and he looked at me. And, at first he was growling, whatever. Then all of a sudden he stopped growling. And then he just kind of like all of a sudden he started to feel guilty. He started to whimper a little bit, and he just kind of looked the other way. It's like he felt guilty about barking. And so again, yes, it's learning to face this and not make up stories and whatever. But as we face it, we see that these individuals are struggling too, and we've all been part of creation, like you say, and how you describe this is very, very well. And it will confuse a lot of people. But again, look at what people go through to get degrees and PhDs and all this distorted, archaic nonsense with what we're presenting here, and especially you now with all the videos you have. This is just beyond terrific. It really is. So people have this huge possibility. So as we keep going, these people, they're showing up because they do see what we're presenting, and that is, yes, the place is getting darker, and they're going to be in darkness, and they're not going to be able to create. That's very real. So it's like in your house, you're walking around. What the heck can you do a whole lot when you're bumping into things because you can't see nothing? Everything is black when the electricity and everything is off. So you start to use your intuitiveness, but at the same time, most people don't know what that is because they've been so literalized.